So in these crazy times that we are living in, ammunition has gotten in short supply, hasn't it? You know it, we know it. So what do? You don't want to shoot up all your practice ammunition. You don't want to shoot up your expensive hollow points, right? But you want to keep your skills up. What do? With ammunition being in such short supply, you can't even shoot lots of it. You might have gone to the range before and shot a couple hundred rounds of 9mm or 45 or something like that. You don't want to do that right now because you're not sure you can replace it. So what do? Well, there are some alternatives. There are those little laser module units out there where you have a laser mechanism that goes in your gun and it gives you a corresponding target. You can use those. Those are kind of handy. Some of them are kind of expensive. Sometimes they're hard to find. So what do? What do you do with your gun? How do you make that work? Well, there's such a thing as what's called dry firing. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with dry or wet. Dry just simply meaning you're not using live ammunition in the gun. Now, there are a lot of people who say you should never dry fire a gun because you might break the firing pin. Well, there's some validity to that, but it's not the whole story, okay? Most modern firearms that are center fires, you can safely dry fire repeatedly without hurting the gun, without hurting the firing pin. There are some that you shouldn't dry fire, okay? North American Arms 22 revolver. The point is it's a 22. Most rimfire cartridge firearms, 22 short, long rifle, 17 HMR, 17 WSM, those rounds that are rimfires, you should not dry fire. Why not? This has a fixed firing pin on the hammer. You dry fire this, that firing pin is hitting, because it's a rim fire, it's hitting where the rim was, so it's hitting the side of the cylinder every time you pull the trigger. So on something like this, you'll blunt it, you may eventually break it. Other firearms, rimfire guns that have internal firing pins, once again, that firing pin's kind of hitting the rim. Now, there are some small exceptions. Glock says their G44 is safe to dry fire. Ruger says their SR22 is safe to dry fire. Should you dry fire it? Lots? Leave that up to you. Follow the manufacturer's recommendations. If you're going to dry fire something like that, you can put something called a snap cap in it. A snap cap is simply a dummy cartridge or a training round, okay? So, generally speaking, rimfire is not good to dry fire them. But most modern center fires, you can. Smith & Wesson 642 double action revolver. Dry firing is a legitimate training tool. I'm going to say that again. It is a legitimate training tool. When you're shooting a handgun, you've got front sight focus and trigger squeeze. Those are the two things you put together to make this thing shoot straight and hit what you're aiming at. Well, dry firing helps you acquire and maintain those skills of watching that front sight and managing that trigger. And on a gun like this that has a double action trigger, it can be particularly beneficial because you learn how to manage this trigger. Double action triggers are heavier than single action triggers or striker fired triggers because mechanically you're levering a hammer back inside and then you're releasing it. But it's that mechanical leverage the first part of the pull that makes it heavier and harder to manage, okay? So this is a great way to establish memory in your brain, not really in your muscles, but memory in your brain, and now your brain knows what kind of strength it takes to run this thing. So you can get on target, and you can pull that hammer straight through, pull that trigger straight through, so the gun sits there and doesn't move. And it gives you good leverage on the trigger. It also helps you learn where on the trigger to put your finger. On a double action trigger, you need more leverage on it to pull it through because it's heavier, so you need more leverage, right? So helps you do that. Legitimate training tool. Front sight focus, trigger squeeze at something you can line up on the wall, on the TV, whatever, right? Before you dry fire anything, keep all the live ammunition away from it. Guns should be, in the case of this double action revolver particularly, you can just run it empty. It's not going to hurt it. But keep all your live ammunition out of there. And kind of get established in your head, the mindset. I'm dry firing right now, right here with this gun. When I'm done dry firing, I'm done dry firing. Put everything away. Don't suddenly say, boy, I want to do that again. because you may mess up and end up with live ammunition in the mix. You don't want that. You don't want to shoot a hole in something. So keep the live ammunition out of the room, locked up, whatever. Keep the gun safe, okay? Now, semi-automatic pistols. Glock. You can dry fire these things to your heart's content all day long, and it is not going to hurt them, okay? Make sure it's empty and safe, of course. Then you can go ahead and dry fire it. With a semi-automatic pistol, most of you know, you put an empty magazine in it. Well, every time you pull the slide back, it's going to lock open. Then you got to close it. Well, there's an easier way to run these things if you're dry fire practicing, okay? When you pull the trigger, all you have to do is pull the slide back about that far and the trigger resets. And if I kept a magazine out of it, number one, I'm not risking a magazine in it that has potentially ammunition, right? Even though I should be paying attention and keeping that away. The other thing is now I can cycle it completely and I have no worries about it locking open. And what are we doing? We're doing front sight focus and trigger squeeze again, right? So the gun doesn't move. You can practice that old drill too where you set something up on top of the slide, like a quarter or something that will set up here on this square slide. So when you pull the trigger, whatever you set up there doesn't move, doesn't fall off. That helps you manage the trigger. Trigger finger position. You can train yourself here. You don't need as much trigger finger on this as you do on a double action revolver. Usually to the first pad, right there, is plenty enough to get you right where you need to be so the thing will fire and the gun doesn't move. Okay? Single action pistol. Once again, empty and safe. With a gun like this, you don't even have to cycle the slide to reset the trigger, right? And you need even less finger on the trigger than you do on a Glock. All you have to do is pull it that much. So I've literally got the center of my first pad on there, okay? I don't even have to cycle the slide. All I got to do is cock the hammer again. With a weapon like this that has a manual safety, you can train yourself to come from the holster, take the safety off, present on target, pull the trigger. Then you can reset yourself and do it again. So you can learn how to run the safety correctly on a weapon like this or any weapon that has a manual safety that you're continually operating, right? You can learn how to do that. Proper management of that safety. So your mind starts to understand the sequence. Grip, safety comes off, look at the target and decide whether I'm going to fire. So you can train yourself to do that in that safe, dry firing environment, right? You can also use something like this. This is a dummy or training cartridge. Nothing comes out of it. It's just a solid piece of metal that's shaped like the corresponding caliber that it's built for. Has a little mechanism, small mechanism, spring in the back with a firing pin. You can load these in a magazine just like you would a live round. You can put it in the gun and cycle it just like you would a live round. It's a great way, especially for a new shooter, to get used to how this works, look at it, understand how it operates without risking having a live round in there that you might have an accidental discharge with, okay? On something like this, when you cycle it, it's going to kick it out just like it would if it was a live cartridge. So it gives you a good means of learning how to do that. If a particular manufacturer recommends that you don't dry fire their weapon, you can get dummy cartridges, training cartridges, usually in a variety of calibers. You can use those. Now you can safely operate the weapon, operate the trigger mechanism without worrying about it. Rifles, shotguns, normally completely safe to dry fire, no problem. Valid, legitimate training tool. Helps you learn how to run the gun, operate all the controls on it correctly, helps you learn your front sight focus and trigger squeeze, and you can do it in a quiet environment. You don't need ear protection, you don't need eye protection. You can do it in any room that in your place. You can set up a target to shoot at. You could even put up a silhouette target if you want to and practice that. Although if you're trying to be accurate, something small that front sight will mate to is a good way to do that. So, quick recap. Most modern firearms are safe to dry fire, with the exception of rimfires. 22s, 17 HMR, 17 WSM, 17 Mach 2 even. Those rimfire cartridges. Normally you do not want to dry fire them unless you have a snap cap or a training round in the gun. Most everything else, completely safe to dry fire. Legitimate training tool. You can dry fire a lot and it will help you develop those mechanical skills with the gun that are going to translate directly to being able to shoot it accurately and effectively on the range with live ammunition. And you're not expending your live ammunition. So you're getting good training time in that doesn't cost you anything. Okay? All right. Well, that's all we have for today for this. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'm Alan for Old English Outfitters.